Hello, everybody. Good evening. Hello. Well, good evening and welcome to the annual Morehouse College Martin Luther King Jr. Lecture and Conversation Program. It's really so great to be back and to be in person, and so happy that all of you could come out and join us this evening. I am Vicki Crawford, the director of the office that has oversight for the Morehouse King Collection. And this collection is an extraordinary gathering of primary documents that belong to Dr. King. The collection includes iconic sermons and speeches and correspondence with world leaders and other writings, along with lots of other memorabilia and other artifacts. The college acquired this rare archive of material 20 years ago, and shortly thereafter, it established an office with oversight for teaching, research, and public outreach using the collection. We do this work along with our partners, the Atlanta University Center Robert W. Woodruff Library, where the collection is housed and cared for, as well as the National Center for Civil and Human Rights in downtown Atlanta, where the collection is often on exhibit. This year's commemoration of the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is centered around recognition of the 60th anniversary of the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. The march was organized by labor leader A. Philip Randolph, along with civil rights strategist Bayard Rustin and others such as Dorothy Height and Anna Arnold Hedgeman, and it was held August 28, 1963. The march drew a diversity of over 200,000 people to the National Mall. They represented various religious, labor, and civil rights groups from around the country. The demonstrators came to protest against racial injustice, along with discrimination in jobs, housing, education, and voting, among other critical issues. This evening's theme, "Now is the Time," is taken from a line from Dr. King's famous speech, "I Have a Dream," which he delivered at the march. This evening, we are happy to have with us our panelists, Bakari Sellers, Christopher Bruce, and my colleague, Dr. David Wall-Rice, as moderator. Unfortunately, Andrea Young could not join us. She is being honored this evening by Planned Parenthood of Georgia. But first, I just want to take one moment before we begin to recognize a few people in the audience. I'd first like to recognize our King Legacy Scholars, if they would stand up. Thank you, guys. I think there are a couple more somewhere around. Yes, over here. There's information about this group on the back of the program, but it's a learning community of students who are interested in social justice issues and interested in knowing more about Dr. King. Next, I want to recognize a few members of our Morehouse leadership team who are here with us. First, I want to recognize the Provost and Senior Vice President of the college, Dr. Kendrick Brown, whom you'll hear from in a minute, shortly. He's here. Also, I'd like to recognize Dr. Leah Criquet, who's Associate Provost for Pedagogy and Assessment. Is Dr. Criquet here? Okay. Oh, there she is, okay. And Professor of English. And I'd like to recognize our Dean of the Division of Humanities, Social Sciences, Media, and Arts, and Professor of Sociology, Dr. Regine Jackson. Dr. Jackson, if you stand, please. Okay. And finally, I would like to recognize our very dedicated team of archivists and librarians. We couldn't do this work without them at the Atlanta University Robert W. Woodruff Library. If they're here, please stand. The archivists who are here and the librarians. Thank you all so much for all you do. All right, the program will proceed as printed, and I'd like to bring up Dr. Brown. Thank you.
Good evening. I have the distinct privilege to welcome you to Morehouse College on behalf of our president, Dr. David A. Thomas, who unfortunately is not able to be here tonight. At Morehouse, we are keenly aware of the legacy of Dr. King. We feel privileged to have played a part in helping to form him into the person who came out to transform the world. We're all grateful, of course, for the incredible work that Dr. King did for so many years. We're all captivated by his words. We're all moved by his work. But I think what really strikes all of us is his incredible and enduring commitment to justice. As we reflect on what he has contributed, as we celebrate that legacy, we should never, of course, forget our responsibility to ensuring that his dream does not end. And so it's incumbent upon us to continue to move forward, to have moments and events like this that stimulate our imagination, that enable us to refocus ourselves on what's so very important, not just for ourselves and our communities, but also what's important for future generations. So I'm happy to be here to welcome you into this space. I'm very happy, of course, to benefit greatly, personally as well as for our college, in the good work that Dr. Crawford does. And so with that, please, by all means, engage in this conversation, partake of this intellectual and spiritual nourishment so we can all continue to do the good work that Dr. King started, and we have a responsibility to continue. Thank you all, and we're very happy to have you at Morehouse for this event. Have a good evening.
Selection, Gonna Shout All Over God's Heaven, is arranged by Dr. Uzi Brown, Jr. I got a robe, you got a robe, all God's children got a robe. When I get to heaven, gonna put on my robe, gonna shout all over God's heaven. Heaven, heaven, everybody talking about heaven ain't going there. Heaven, heaven, I'm gonna shout all over God's heaven. I got a crown, you got a crown, all God's children got a crown. When I get to heaven, gonna put on my crown, gonna shout all over God's heaven. Heaven, heaven, everybody talking about heaven ain't going there. Heaven, heaven, I'm gonna shout all over God's heaven. I got a shoes, you got a shoes, all God's children got shoes. When I get to heaven, gonna put on my shoes, gonna walk all over God's heaven. Heaven, yes, heaven. Everybody talking about heaven ain't going there. Heaven, heaven, shout all over God's heaven. I got a harp, you got a harp, all of God's children got a harp. Yes, when I get to heaven, gonna play on my harp, gonna play all over God's heaven. Heaven, heaven, everybody talking about heaven ain't going there. Heaven, heaven, shout all over God's heaven. got a song. Yes, you got a song. All God's children got a song. When we get to heaven, gonna sing a new song. Gonna sing all over God's heaven. Heaven, yes, heaven. Oh, everybody talking about heaven ain't going there. Heaven, heaven. I'm gonna shout all over God's heaven.
Good evening. My name is Barrett Johnson,
My name is Anyaba Jean-Baptiste,
and we are your 2022-2023 King Legacy Scholars, along with our brothers on the front. And we would like to introduce our panelists for tonight.
Christopher Bruce, Esquire, is the Policy and Advocacy Director of the ACLU of Georgia. For years, Bruce has been an avid leader in the fight for civil rights and liberties across Georgia and the country. He is a community advocate, an advisor to elected officials and other government entities on policies that foster change, and a guest lecturer at many universities, including Harvard Law School, the University of Georgia, and Emory University. Bruce is known for initiatives such as the Voter Access Project that has placed hundreds of people to work at polling precincts and pioneered the first ever program of placing lawyers at every polling precinct in Atlanta to ensure voting integrity. He has worked with several other civil rights icons such as Senator Warnock, Congresswoman Nakima Williams, and served as political director of Atlanta for Stacey Abrams. Prior to attaining his current position at the ACLU, Bruce graduated cum laude from Georgia State University's honors program and acquired his law degree from the University of Georgia. At Georgia State, he studied political science with a concentration in governmental affairs and a minor in sociology. During his time at UGA Law School, Bruce has served as a member of the Honor Court and was a vice president of the Black Law Students Association. Outside his work at the ACLU of Georgia, Bruce has held many influential positions. He is the New Leaders Council Fellow, a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, Hands on Atlanta, Urban League of Greater Atlanta, Gate City Bar Association, Georgia Association of Black Women Attorneys, and the State Bar of Georgia.
Bakari Sellers, two-time New York Times best-selling author, civil rights activist, attorney, entrepreneur, legislator, and overall prolific cultural analyst. Bakari Sellers continues to build upon the strong legacy he inherited as the son of Gwendolyn Sellers and civil rights leader Cleveland Sellers. While his father helped to lead and organize movements with Stokely Carmichael, Bayard Rustin, and Malcolm X, Bakari has charted his own course in today's struggle for civil and human rights. Working with Representative James Claiborne, Attorney Benjamin Crump, and President Barack Obama, Bakari entered Morehouse College at the age of 16. Later, he earned a law degree from the University of South Carolina Law School, where he became the youngest leader in the South Carolina State Legislature at the age of 22. Sellers is the author of 2 books, a memoir, My Vanishing Country, and a children's book entitled, Who Are Your People? A CNN analyst, Bakari also brings an ability to elevate discourse such that people always feel one step closer to a solution or resolution after he speaks. He combines these and many other talents in his new podcast, the Bakari Sellers Podcast, which airs 2 times a week on the Ringer Podcast Network. Sellers also practices law with the Storm Law Firm LLC in Columbia, South Carolina, where he leads the firm's strategic communication and public affairs team and the diversity, equity, and inclusion consulting practice.
Now we're going to introduce the moderator, our very own Professor Rice. David Wall Rice is a professor of psychology at Morehouse College. principal investigator of the Identity, Art, and Democracy Lab. The lab is a research space that explores expressions of identity violence through engagement, the exploration of varied contexts, and personal narratives.
David graduated from Morehouse with a Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology and earned a doctorate in personality psychology from Howard University. With a master's degree in journalism from Columbia University and postdoctoral studies at Teachers College, Columbia University, David frequently applies his research to cultural criticism and to social impact programming. Thank you.
Thank you.
Testing. Yeah, we good.
Perfect. Good evening. Good evening. It's good to see you all. It's good to see you all as well. Thank you so much for being here with us at this special commemoration and observation of King's legacy, right? Today we know the theme is looking back 60 years distance from the March on Washington for freedom and peace and freedom. What I would like to do today is hopefully extend some of the conversation we had in the green room. We were saying that the green room conversations are sometimes as rich, if not richer, than the ones that you have in front of the audience. But I really want to kind of unpack who you all are as instruments, as technology in this work toward freedom. So, and then get into kind of the weeds, really, and with respect to what our responsibilities here are as students, primarily being at Morehouse College to continue that freedom work. So first, I'll start with you, Brother Sellers. First of all, I want to say that Bakari Sellers, Morehouse College graduate, 2005. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes,
Okay.
yes, sir. They tried to get me out of here 2 years sooner, but I think that most people in the audience know that 2005 was just a class of utter greatness.
Okay, I'm not going to dispute that.
Yeah, I mean, it's
I'm
indisputable.
gonna say-
We're gonna
you said
continue.
indisputable. And Brother Chris Bruce is to my right. This is who you are, correct, Chris Bruce?
Yes, correct. Chris Bruce, not Chris Brown.
Okay, so we'll start there. So Bakari, if you could just kind of tell us a little bit about how it is that you arrive at this freedom work. We know that your family is intimately interwoven into this peace, justice, and freedom work and the legacy that's associated with it. Your pop was at the March on Washington and things like that. But can you talk to us about how you emerged from that, found your own way, and kind of, what your responsibilities and relationship is?
Sure. First, I'm from the big city of Denmark, South Carolina, and I know that Kennard Garrett is probably around this building somewhere. He is also from that big city. And my mom and dad would always tell me that, and my brother and sister, that the two most important words in the English language are the words thank you, and they're not nearly said enough. And so before I begin, I just want to say thank you for having me here today, and thank all of you all for finding it not robbery to spend just a few moments with us here in this amazing building, having this amazing conversation. So yeah, my introduction into the freedom movement, or this freedom work, as you say, was by birth. Mm-hmm. My mother, uniquely enough, now that Memphis is at the forefront of the news, was a part of the desegregating class of Hamilton High School. She was born in 1951 in Funky Town, as we call it, but in Memphis, Tennessee. My father was a part of the Emmett Till generation, which many people who were born in that late 30s, 40s consider themselves to be. When my father was 10 years old, he would always say that the strongest woman in the movement was Mamie Till. And of course, before you could go viral on Snapchat, TikTok, Twitter, you went viral in Ebony magazine, and you saw the picture of Emmett brutally beaten. And it spurred activism of many young blacks during that time. He joined the NAACP. The irony is that my grandparents wanted to get him out of the movement, so they sent him to Howard University. And to further complicate their efforts to get him out of the movement, he was roommates with Stokely Carmichael. And so nothing about that Ended
So
up.
it was preordained.
It was something.
Right.
I don't know what it was, but they could not extricate him. So Stokely actually graduated from Howard, convinced my dad to drop out of school. And my dad dropped out of Howard and joined SNCC, making $8 a week. And so, yeah, my dad was in charge of, this is a true story, my dad was in charge of making cheese sandwiches for volunteers at the March on Washington. My dad led the search mission in Philadelphia, Mississippi for Goodman, Schwerner, and Cheney. My father was actually arrested here in Atlanta, Georgia for refusing to go to Vietnam. He was represented by Johnny Cochran, legend at the time, who represented many black civil rights icons. And then February 8th of '68, my father was shot in the Orange Rick Massacre and was incarcerated, ended up going to prison for a year. The officers were found not guilty. My dad was charged, tried, and convicted of rioting. And so that, you know, for me, it's a little different being part of this unique village. I'm a product of the proverb, it takes a village to raise a child. But my village is unique in that for me, it's like Uncle Jesse, Uncle Mary, and Uncle Julian, Aunt Kathleen, all of these names of those individuals who poured so much into the movement and gave so much of themselves. And so that is my history, and those are the shoulders I stand upon, which is the reason I do this work today. And my father and mother both instilled in my brother and I. My brother graduated from here as well. My sister graduated from Xavier University, but they told us we could be anything we wanted to be as long as we were change agents. And so here we are.
So what do you mean, Bakari, when you say my vanishing country, right, in referencing your memoir? Because it seems like, certainly, obviously, you have a tableau of what it is that your country looked like. You're not saying my vanishing democracy. Democracy has always been compromised or complicated in some ways.
It's
for black
fragile.
folk. Right. So what do you mean by my vanishing? What does that mean? Because it seems like if you're looking at your history and how it is that you've been associated with freedom movements. Right?
Yeah, so My Vanishing Country is two things. And for those who don't know, My Vanishing Country is the title of my book. I wanted to name the book Country, but then if you Google country, too much other stuff comes up, so that was terrible. And then I wanted to be, this is a true story, I wanted to be, the cover of my book to be me enveloped in a burning Confederate flag. And my editor was like, that's a bit much, my brother. I said, okay.
We need that for the remix. I want that cover.
So I tried to be standing there like a little Biggie Smalls with like the, you know, just a naked baby with the burning Confederate flag behind me. But no, they vetoed all of that. So you have this little innocent me who's 6 years old. I remember where I was on my way to Summer League basketball. But My Vanishing Country is twofold. First, I felt as if when I was writing the book, many of the ideals and principles, life, liberty, justice, truth, peace, love, those ideals that we hold true were vanishing from a very 50,000-foot view. And I went into the book in depth and talked about my experiences and my family's experiences and why I thought those ideals were vanishing. But from a very, very street-level view, I'm from the poor rural South. I'm from Denmark. 3 stoplights, a blinking light. You had the Chinese food spot. You had the theater. You got the We Bake that's run by the Mennonites. You got the record store. You got the Ace Hardware, the 5 and Dime where you get the milk, where you get the ices, and Tootin's Fried Chicken. And so that was our main street. But like many black main streets in America, you drive up and down, and they're vanishing before your eyes. Our hospital is closed, so you can't get health care. I live in a food desert where you can't, I think the definition from the USDA now is more than a mile or 2 without access to fresh fruits and vegetables. You know, it's those type of very real things about the plight of black folk, particularly in the South. And it was really pissing me off that every time in politics we'd have conversations about the working class America, and they zoom in on some diner in Ohio with a bunch of white folk. And I was like, I know working class America, and it looks like me, and so I wanted to write about it.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Appreciate
Sure.
it. Brother Bruce, talk to us about how it is that you stepped squarely into the freedom work that you do, please.
Oh, absolutely. And I always want to start off with thank you for the invitation to speak. It's an honor and a privilege to be up here on this stage. I am one of 7 children. My parents have been married 45 years. My dad is a retired Army colonel, and my mother still teaches to this day in Stone Mountain at Stevenson High School. The thing that I start off with that is one, I grew up in a family with a lot of other people. You can imagine living with 8 people in your house, 8 other people, and only 2 bathrooms. My parents had 1 bathroom, the other 7 of us had to share another. So there was a lot of compromise that had to happen on a daily basis. Especially I have 4 sisters, yes.
Wow. Yeah.
So working that through, and then we also traveled across the country too. I've lived in 7 different states, all the way from Baltimore to Georgia, to Arizona, to Alabama, to Illinois, to Pennsylvania. So I've been into predominantly white schools to predominantly black schools. And the thing that I mostly found out was there's a problem. And the problem isn't something that deals necessarily with our race, it's the way that we deal with each other. Because I've had some great white friends, had some great black friends. I've had some problems with them interacting with each other for one reason or another, and can never really figure out what is it that you're seeing beyond someone's character, as Dr. King would always state. So getting into social justice, really trying to figure out what's the psyche behind people. So when I finally got into law school and I had an internship with the Department of Justice, because I saw so much injustice in the world, this was when Trayvon Martin was murdered. And I was deployed down into Florida with the Department of Justice, and they held meetings with the mayor, community activists, and other people all across the state, trying to bring calm and peace and find a common understanding of saying that not only are we Americans, we're people. We are just simply people, and love that job to death. Unfortunately, it happened around the time the recession was, so the only job I could get was being an insurance defense attorney. But I know I hate don't laugh. Well, it's the only job I could take at the time. It was the only job that was paying. I actually worked before that as a prosecutor for free because they were saying you can get experience, we can't pay you money. That's a wholly different story. Once I left the internship, my strife for social justice did not end. So in 2016, when you had other Black Lives Matter protests, I'm still an insurance defense attorney, knew absolutely nothing about social justice, but I did do a little criminal law because my friends would get in trouble. You'll find that if you go to law school, everybody calls you about an issue about the law. I said once protesters were being arrested for protesting. So I said, I will represent you for free if you are protesting, you get arrested by the police. It was like the first viral tweet that I ever had for a moment. And it was just simply because I said, I want to help out. And then after that, we get into 2020, I get picked up by the ACLU, working for civil rights and civil liberties and justice. So it was one while I was doing something in law school as a student working in social justice. Another one while I did have a professional job where it wasn't my job to do social justice, but on my off time I was doing social justice. And then it led to a full-time job into doing social justice. It was always the pattern, because a lot of times, the reason why I'm bringing up that story, a lot of times people are saying, should I quit my job and go into this? You don't have to necessarily. It's just wherever the good Lord leads you. And the good Lord led me to this job. He hasn't led me to another job after this, and I love what I do right now. But social justice is one of the things that I'm very passionate about. I will be fighting for it literally to the day I die. It doesn't matter if I'm in this job or I'm not.
This seems like a really, really pedestrian question to ask, but why? And you gave us a little bit of the background, right? Where you came from, the negotiation in the House, and how it is that you stepped into the Department of Justice and things like that. But what keeps you moving, right? We talked a little bit backstage in the green room around, you working and being motivated around the injustice that was visited on the murder of Trayvon Martin, right? How do you keep doing that work, or why is it that you're doing this pronounced acute work in this space, do you think? And I'm asking this because you shouldn't have said psyche, right? So I'm interested in like, what's the psyche that kind of animates you?
It's strange, right? My job is to put myself out of the job. Mm-hmm. I am supposed to be solving the social ills that are happening within our communities, especially when it deals with racial justice. So my psyche is always goes back to we are all humans. We are all under the same creator, supposed to be working together. And it baffles my mind that this problem did not start with us. It started centuries ago. And yet it still persists to this day. So when we were having that conversation in the green room, has progress been made? Yes, you can always say there's progress, but there's still problems that proceed. And I'm a problem solver. And the biggest problem I want to solve is the problems that happen in the African American community, because we can have so much more. And that's what I want everyone to realize.
So if we talk about gains being made, right, we know that we had the dark times of at least the 45th president being in office. Well, we're like, God, what the hell is going on, right? He's not in office anymore. We know Congress is compromised and all that kind of stuff, but we're on equal footing now, aren't we? Do we really have to, agitate? I mean, voter suppression, sure, maybe it's a thing or something like that in Georgia or whatnot, but are there really still issues for us? And I'm obviously, again, this is a softball question that I'm asking here. Why is it that we still need to be in the fight? Is everything okay with our democracy? Is our democracy slipping through our fingers?
You just asked me about 11 questions.
I know.
I felt like I'm on here with Don Lemon. I mean, like, which one of these questions do you
Whichever one you're most comfortable
do you want
with.
me to answer? Yes,
Well,
I just want to say yes,
yes
and then
is
go
the
to
answer,
commercial
right?
break.
That's right. No, that's right. But how so? Because I think we
let
can
me
be
just
fooled,
let me answer
right?
let me answer the question this way. I think people are intellectually dishonest if you deny the progress that we've made in this country. But I'm very cognizant of the fact that every ounce of progress that's been made in this country is because of black blood that's flowed through the streets. And people often would say, well, Bakari, what do you mean by that? And I say, well, you don't get the 1964 and 65 Voting Rights Act and Civil Rights Act, but for the Edmund Pettus Bridge and the fact that white people on nightly news were actually able to see black folks' skulls get crushed. You literally do not get the Fair Housing Act of 1968, but for the assassination of Dr. King. We don't even take the Confederate flag down in South Carolina, but for the murder of one of my good friends and 8 others in a church in Mother Emanuel. We don't have a conversation about criminal justice reform in the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act without a black man calling for his mom and being kneed in the back of the neck for over 9 minutes. So my answer to your question is that we've made a great deal of progress, like my friend Chris Bruce was saying. But we still have yet a ways to go. And you asked me, do we still have problems? And I flippantly told you the answer was yes. And the answer is yes, because the cost of black folk making progress in this country is still high. The same cost that we had in the early 1960s, the same price that we had to pay for progress is the same price we have to pay today. And so for me, that is the trouble. That is where the friction lies. And we can delve into the systemic issues that we face, because I don't really care when people call me nigger. I get that all the time. I mean, it is what it is. But for me, it's about the systems of injustice that we face as a country. Jackson, Mississippi, for example, Flint, Michigan, Denmark, South Carolina, where you don't have potable water. That don't happen in white communities. Yeah. Black women are still 3 times more likely to die during childbirth. My wife's a perfect example than white women. It cuts across socioeconomic levels. And black kids are punished because of the zip code that they're born into, in terms of the way that they're educated in this country, or miseducated in this country. And I think one of the better examples is a criminal justice system, which we know is rooted in systemic ills, because we saw 5 black men brutally beat and kill and stump out. They got the Jump Out Boys in Memphis, Tennessee, and we just saw we're seeing the results of that unfold even while we're in this room. And so Wolf just asked me, when I was just on TV in the back, and Wolf was asking me about the officers being black. And I said, I don't really care if the officers are black, Hispanic, purple. For me, it's not about the color of the officer, but it's a system of injustice that does not value or give benefit to the humanity of black bodies. And so I think when we look at it like that, I just surmise that, you know, the ills are still there. And if somebody wants to ask specifically what those issues are, policy points, I'd love to have that policy conversation. Sure. But a very generalized answer is that, you know, I want to get to a point where the cost of our freedom is not our blood.
Mm-hmm. And how do we do that? I mean, obviously.
Well, shit, if I knew that answer, I wouldn't still be fighting.
but what are steps?
We're not in King Chapel.
No, we're not. That's
the mics would have gone.
You know where you're at. That's right. But I think you so eloquently illustrate and vividly that we really are literally talking about black blood being spilled for our democracy to grow, right? And that's abhorrent because it positions us still as inhuman, right? In terms of how it is that we are treated and what the cost must be in order for this democracy that benefits so oftentimes white folks to the detriment and compromise of all other marginalized people to grow and develop and to move forward. I guess I'm asking, kind of, as we're stepping into it, this idea around voting. We've already, is the vote still important in terms of how it is that we change and push democracy? We know that you all both did a lot of work around, voter suppression in ensuring that that wasn't something that was going to compromise us to the extent that it possibly could. How do we still attach ourselves and make meaningful or explain the meaning and the significance of the vote when we're kind of out of season, as it were? We're just on the other side of midterms and things are, they're still the way they are. How do we have that conversation?
Well, as, again, my good friend Bakari was saying, I'm going to add one more to your list, and I know you can go forever on this, of black blood being spilled, and get kind of personal, get more home. Ahmaud Arbery, when he was murdered in 2020 here, you got the Hate Crimes Act in Georgia. Georgia was one of the few states in the entire nation that did not have a Hate Crimes Act.
We still don't in South Carolina.
Exactly. In South Carolina doesn't. And God forbid you have to have a black man die in South Carolina for you to get a Hate Crimes Act passed. That's right. Like, that's democracy, when you can get something done to progress in the community without someone dying, specifically a black man dying within it. So when you're talking about the importance of voting and everything else, we can have these measures passed if you have the right people in office to get them passed. But if you're not voting, you're not getting the right people in office. You're not getting the right people in office. You're not getting the right pieces of legislation to pass to impact your community. That's specifically on social justice issues. I'm talking to you about something that deals with something that I've learned on campaigns and everything else. Money, something that touches you every day. If I told you that the state of Georgia has over a $60 billion budget, but less than 1% of those contracts go to minorities, go to people that look like you make up a large portion. I was about to curse too. I'm about to follow you into everything. You make up a large portion of this population. You make a large portion of this tax base, of this economy, but you're getting less than 1% of the contracts from the state, from your money. This is taxpayer dollars. This is your money. That goes along with voting as well. So when it comes down to a democracy, as far as you being heard, not only in the voting booth, but with your pockets and your wallets, that's a problem, and we need to solve it in some form or fashion.
Yeah, voting is essential, but voting is just the front door of democracy. I mean, then you get in, and what do? I mean, I think that's the follow-through, and he brought up a really good point. It's the access to capital, it's the accountability, it's all of those other things. But if you don't vote, you don't have a seat at the table. Yeah. I mean, and so I think that is, voting is certainly, in particular, I think that voting in local elections is even more important than what you do in the United States Congress and for President of the United States. Yeah. I think the impact that you have on city council races, I think the impact you have on school board races are more important than the impact of your vote in 1600 Washington or 1600 Pennsylvania.
Black Lives Matter Avenue.
What now?
Isn't it called Black Lives Matter Avenue now?
No, it's still called Pennsylvania. That's the other
1600
street.
Pennsylvania?
That's
the one that goes on across.
That's perpendicular.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Perpendicular. He graduated from Morehouse. I went to Georgia State.
So, Brother Bruce, talk to me about this. We talked about progress. Bakari helped us here talking about progress, and you can't disrespect the progress that's been made or the people who have sacrificed their lives in the name of progress and growing freedoms and democracy. You can't do that. But we were saying, okay, how is it that you think about justice and then still justice denied? So you talked about Trayvon Martin. I talked about, how when I was in school here in '95, pretty good year as well, but in '95, this idea of Rodney King being stomped out by cops and them not suffering any ill as the result of it. And then here we are again. We were just talking about Nichols. And talk to us about how it is that we're still in a predicament and what it is that we can or should be doing around protest, obviously around the vote. It seems like we've got to be schizophrenic with how it is that we approach solutions to democracy being in the margins as black and brown people.
Democracy and our system of justice, right? And I think that goes along with your definition of justice. Everybody may have a different definition. Mine personally, justice is when it never happens again. I know people clap and they scream and they're like, oh yes, this person, this police officer, they're now going to jail, they'll never be heard from again or anything else, but it keeps happening. That's not justice to me. Justice is when this stops, right? Why do we have to repeat the same trauma, the same tragedies over and over again? You're talking about Rodney King. And again, we both on this stage can go even further back into that. Yeah. When does it end? And even if you do say the police officers in Rodney King, they get let go, the police officers that happen to Nichols, who are black, whichever way you want to put it, is still the police, like you had said before. It's an institutional problem.
No, the race of cop is cop.
There we go. That's even more powerful, right? Because what you want to make sure is that this institution that has its roots within slavery, because remember the first slave patrols eventually evolved into police departments in the States. That's where it comes into, and that knowledge needs to be spread out altogether. So your democracy, the people that you vote for, the people that go into office and everything else, they're the ones who control police officers. They're the ones who talk about this all the time. They fund them, but the corrective actions that happen or try to happen, but you have laws like qualified immunity that let police officers get off or anything else. So even if these police officers are found guilty of murder or anything else that happens in Memphis, is it justice? Because we all know it's not an if, it's going to happen again. The question is, when does it stop?
So before we open questions up to the audience, what might you charge the young folks who are viewing you all now to do in fighting for social justice and in pushing towards change? Because it can seem overwhelming. Again, in putting myself in the position of 95 and seeing these cops go free after beating the hell out of Rodney King, I felt vulnerable and in many ways incapable. But I felt the same way when I saw Trayvon Martin get blasted in the back. You feel the same way when you look at George Floyd getting choked out on TV. I mean, how do you maintain and do you persist? And I want to speak specifically to these young black men who are at Morehouse College now. What do you do? How do you take care of yourself? What do you do in terms of leaning into work that allows for continued progress without necessarily having to sacrifice self?
I mean, that's a good question. I think fundamentally, though, everybody doesn't have to do this work. Just because you're black doesn't mean you have to be on a quest for social justice. Because if your heart's not in it and this ain't what you want to do, I don't need you anyway. I mean, you very well can go and live in a gated community and have a great family and do you and be happy, and that's cool. I mean, I'm not going to knock you for it. That's all good. We all have different ministries. right? And so I want everyone to understand that everybody's not going to be there with you. That's the first thing. The second thing is you have to take care of yourself mentally, spiritually, emotionally, physically, because if you're not healthy, then you're not good to anybody else. And I think that one of the things, this is a whole nother conversation for this particular crowd, but just a whole nother conversation, we can talk about mental health and the way that we're affected by the brutality that we see and by the experience of just being a black man in America. And I think that there is a weight that goes with carrying that. And then there is another anxiety and weight that comes from being a black father in America. You know, this, I don't know if it's a saying, but it's how I kind of coined my feelings when I had twins, one boy, one girl. And then, you know, when you see your son come out, you'll be like, oh my God, I'd die for you, right? And then when you see your daughter, you like, oh my God, I'll kill for you. I mean, she just made me a murderer overnight, right? So, but there's this sense of worry that goes with having black children in the world, just running around all willy-nilly with the naivete, the little terrorist I got. Like, they just can't be little white kids and play with toy guns. I mean, they just don't have that ability. And so you have that anxiety that you have to work through. And I think it's necessary that as you do this work, whatever that is, you take care of yourself. And then I'll give you the same advice my father told the three of us, which is in whatever field you choose to be in, be a change agent. You don't have to be a lawyer like we are. You don't have to be a protester or whatever that people say that may be. I mean, you can be a doctor, you can be an accountant, you can be a teacher. And in all of those different facets and realms and career choices and paths, you can make sure that one of your goals is improving the plight of people that look like you. And making sure that I've never met anybody in my community when you sit down and talk to them that wants a handout. Everybody just wants a hand up. They don't want you to pick them to win. They just want opportunity to be on the dance floor, and that's what I try to do.
Yeah, that sounds good. Thank you for that. Brother Bruce?
I'll be brief. I believe that agitation is the answer. There's not been anything that's happened in this country without agitators getting in someone's face, saying that there's an injustice, saying anything else. So we know that slavery happened in this country, and people were okay with it. People that you look left and right to. We know the Civil Rights Act. People were okay with it. Mothers being able to go and desegregate schools while others did not want them there. That type of agitation actually made a change within it. So, like you were saying, and I'll say this though, please don't go to law school because there's a lot of other things that you can do to make a change. Unless you are called to do it, be called, know who you are up front, and like you were saying, be a change agent within it. But be that agitator in someone's face, in your state representative's face, because that is literally how this system is set up. But also know this, same thing that happens with black people all the time. Black people not only work into a system, they perfect it, and they do it better than anyone else can do it. So know that the rules are going to change once you do get into the system and you do become that change agent. Then they're going to change the rules. You're going to have to change as well. Until, again, you get to that point of justice when it does not happen again.
Thank you. I appreciate both of what you all shared, and I resonate around this idea, and this is me pushing, right, as a professor here at the college, that there is a responsibility that you have to be a change agent and to also find your ministry and to find your own way about how it is, with respect to how it is that you're going to make life better for folks who come alongside and or behind you, right? I appreciate that. Thank you. So let's go ahead and go to audience questions, please. There's a microphone on the single side. So if there are any questions that we might have from the audience, please come on up to the microphone and we'll talk to you. You help us out a little bit.
When it comes to progression, how important is accountability amongst ourselves, specifically amongst the elders and the youth?
I think accountability is important, but I mean, you always have to order your steps, like the old gospel song. I'm a true believer in ordering your steps. I'm a true believer in a plan of action. And I think that along with accountability comes a vision. And I tell people all the time, one of my favorite phrases is dream with your eyes open, right? That's my favorite phrase in the entire world. And I always tell people, yeah, it's cool to hold people accountable. You should. That is a mandatory part of our being, accountability. But we also have to have a plan, an action plan, so we're not just holding people accountable, but we have a vision of what we want to see. And sometimes we do one without the other, or we don't do either.
And it seems like it's important to have a distinction between accountability and blame as well, right? This idea of agency also falls squarely on the generation that is, quote unquote, up to bat.
Also, the thing that pisses me off the most is that people get honed in on accountability, but are absent gratefulness. Like, we can tell people what's wrong with them 100 times faster than we can tell anybody thank you. And I think that, I would tell people that when I was an elected, first of all, I'm the best type of state legislator. I'm retired, right? But being a pastor and a politician are the only two professions in this country where people expect more out of you than they expect from themselves. And I always tell people, I have a whole thing about grace, which I won't go into unless somebody asks, but we are just not grateful enough. And we never say the words thank you unless we need something. And so it's hard to have someone receptive to accountability absent that gratefulness. Does that make sense?
It does. I appreciate that.
And just adding on to that, accountability is normally like it's taken in a negative light a lot of times. When it comes to accountability, you may need to ask yourself sometimes of, how could I help out this other person?
Help them be better.
Help them be better in some way or form or fashion. So it's like, if you are responsible for something, was that too hard for you, brother? Did you need some help? Can I help lift you up? Can I take some of that load off of you? And that's with it being accountable to yourself. Because if you all have the same goal, really, you're supposed to accomplish that goal altogether. I wanted to say, the way you started off, it sounded like you were going to go into a really good poem. I don't know what happened. Keep it simple. All right, keep it simple. There you go.
But I also like this idea around accountability to oneself and how it is that you extend yourselves to others, because that has to do with community, right? And we know that community blocks are things that help for us to push agendas forward. And I really resonate with what you're saying, Bakari, around, I won't ask you to go into it now, I know you got a flight to catch, but this idea around grace. How is it that you are raised and are able to be graceful in a moment and understand how it is that individuals who you might want to hold accountable and say should have done more, you see what it is that they have done with what it is that they had, and what are the lessons that, or the tools that you might lend to them and to community that help to push things
Grace
forward.
is unique. Go ahead and ask your question, brother, and then I'm going to answer Grace and then answer yours too.
This is kind of a sore subject, but I wanted to talk about the recent Tyree Nichols death with the 5 black police officers, and I kind of want to just get y'all perspective on how, like, we've seen cases in the past where white police officers have brutally murdered black people, how they're put on like paid administrative leave, and how with these guys, although I am happy that they are held accountable for their actions, how they were immediately fired and immediately indicted for their actions. So I just kind of want to get you guys' perspective on that situation.
You want me to go ahead?
Asked a better question.
Yeah, that was actually a really good question. That actually was a really good question. And I think that goes along with what we were talking about before about progress. And kind of what you said before. Police officers, that is a race within itself. It is an institutional problem with police officers. If you believe in justice, again, it should not happen again, right? So those police officers being charged and properly charged. I haven't seen the tape. I know it's supposed to be released tomorrow, but I'll see it. And they're supposed to go through a justice system. They're supposed to be arrested for doing what they were doing. They're supposed to be charged, and they're supposed to go into a jury in front of their peers to be found guilty or not guilty. Notice in the justice system, they never say, we find the defendant innocent. Have y'all ever noticed that? Because that's not the question that we're looking at. We're looking at guilty or not guilty. The fact that you're going into, and I wanted to specifically talk about it, white police officers versus black police officers, white people versus black people. Why does this always happen? So you're picking up on the right theme at the right time, and we all know the same answer. We do, but you can look deeper. Is this a real justice system that's happening in Memphis? Is it because they're black, or is it because they're holding everybody at the same standard? I could go up here and promulgate, no, it's just because they're black. Possibly, I don't know. I know that there are people who are, as his brother said, holding those police officers accountable. And that's all that the family is asking for right now, that those police officers be charged and held in front of a jury, in front of their peers. But it's still a conversation that needs to happen, and let me stop that. I'm tired of conversations, y'all. There's nothing else to talk about. Stop doing it. And whatever needs to happen to make sure it stops being done, and I'm going back to qualified immunity for all police officers, taking that away so they can be judged and as citizens. I'm a lawyer, Bakari is a lawyer. If I do something stupid, they're not going to hold me at a common citizen standard. They're going to hold me accountable as a lawyer standard. Georgia, unfortunately, is actually at the lowest realm of training for police officers, too. We were actually at 49th until Mississippi added 2 more weeks of training. So now we're at 50th. We're lower than Mississippi, guys. So what I'm going back to again is accountability does mean something. When it comes to between white officers and police officers, you should be seeking justice. But pulling out of that, of saying there's a racial factor into it, is exactly the nerve that America needs to talk about and get to the solution of.
Yeah, no, I'm a firm believer that I start from a premise that some of my friends to the left of me may disagree with. We usually end up at the same place, but they disagree with me, which is that I fundamentally don't think there's anything irredeemable about the United States of America. I think you have to reimagine what she looks like. Mm-hmm. And I'm someone who believes that we have to deconstruct these systems of oppression, burn them down, and then rebuild them, right? And criminal justice is one of them. And I think that what happened in Memphis is like an example of what I'm talking about. Also, very random fact to the brother who asked the question, why was it so swift? Why did it happen like this? Well, the police chief in Memphis, and if I'm not mistaken, is a black woman. And so she was like, y'all got to get up out of here pretty quick, because this ain't gonna really happen on my watch like this. Mm-hmm. I'm disappointed. I'm a mother. I feel, and like, this is what it is. Yeah. And so I'm gonna just call balls and strikes. But also, you don't hear nothing from the police unions, right? Those are usually, the police unions, you can go out and murder a dog if you're a cop. And police unions will say, well, the dog shouldn't have been running that way. Yeah. Right? But they haven't said anything about these 5 black boys. And they belong under the jail where they will be. My point is that this is a part of a larger system that we have to deconstruct. And it's a lot of things that we can talk about, from training, hiring practices, qualified immunity, databases for bad officers, because right now you can be fired from Smyrna and go be hired in the APD. Right. I mean, it makes no sense. So there are a lot of policy points that we can make. But that's a really good question, and unfortunately, it just keeps happening over and over again, and due to technology, we have to see it.
Yeah. Any other questions from the audience? Yes, please.
Hello, my name is Roland Jackson Jr. I'm a sophomore political science major, international studies minor student on the pre-law track from St. Louis, Missouri. And my question is, Mr. Sellers, you talked about, deconstructing America and then kind of like burning it down and building it back up. And I think that's a really, strong point. But how do we go about doing that when we have a lot of the country that, believes that, we're in a great country and, that has never done wrong, won't do wrong, and also a country that's, trying to, ban our history. I think we've heard about critical race theory and trying to erase the history in America. How do we kind of deconstruct our country when we have a whole nother side of people that, don't want to do that?
I never said it was going to be easy. And I think that's what we have to kind of first reconcile with. Nobody said it was going to be easy, and this journey is, a lot of people believed that with the election of Barack Obama, maybe we were beginning to get to the end of this journey, or the consummation thereof. I think that post-racial type of America quickly dissolved, and those dreams were quickly dashed or extinguished. But I'm not going to give up that hope. And one of the reasons I won't is because when we came here, and this is very kind of foo-foo and rhetorical, I guess, sensationalized even, but when we came here, we were stripped of everything but our faith and our hope. And so I refuse to let anybody take those two things away from me. And so by looking at my challenge the way that I do, by reimagining, I have full control of my destiny and not ceding that to anyone else. And I understand the challenges that are out there. I understand the Ron DeSantis challenge. By the way, never trust a man who puts lifts in his boots. I understand many of the obstacles that we face systemically, but that doesn't mean that I'm not going to continue to fight for those old black women who sit at the front row of the church and wear the big hats. And they, when they hug you, you smell like Chanel No. 5 all day long, and they use like a stick of butter or 2 sticks of butter in their pies. You know the ladies I'm talking about. But when they go home, they have to decide whether or not they're going to get their prescription drugs or pay their utility bills, right? Because we know that poverty has placed its grasp on, and black communities in particular, both our newborn and elderly alike. And escaping that trap of impoverishment has become synonymous with the proverbial dog that chases his tail. We know those challenges. But for me, it's doing those things necessary to deconstruct and reimagine so that the work that that lady has put into raising all of us is not in vain. And I think that's one of the more important ways in which I view the country and pushes me to do just that much more. Also, one of the questions you asked about how we stay kind of mentally sane and healthy is the wrong question to ask me is where I will be in 5 years. Part of that is I have really bad anxiety, and my anxiety doesn't allow me to live like that. But the other thing is I'm a one day at a time person. Will Smith once said that if you have enough good effing days, you'll have a good effing life. I ascribe to that notion. And so I want to win today, and then maybe win tomorrow. And if I win 6 out of every 10 days, if I bat 600, if I shoot 60%, then I'm going to the Hall of Fame. And that's the way that I look at life. And so in social justice and reimagining what this country should look like, I try to do that within every 24-hour period.
Thank you so much.
Talk to us about grace a little bit.
Nah, grace is a dope concept because we don't give other people enough and we don't give ourselves enough. And the reason being is through my work in the law, I realized that when you reach a certain point in your life, one of the only things we all have in common is there will become a point in our life where we all ask for it. We all, at some point in our life, will ask for grace. And we are very hesitant to give it out. And the best example I can give you is, what year were you born? You just asked the question. He said 2000 and. Like there's more after that, right? But like, I'm not talking to students anymore. I'm talking to like older folk in this room. Take a kid who was born in 2000. They've lived through 9/11. They lived through the financial crisis. They lived through the housing bubble. They lived through the election of the first black president, the creation of the Tea Party, re-election of the first black president. They've lived through Parkland. They've lived through Nevada, which is the largest mass shooting in the history of this country. They lived through the election of Donald Trump. They lived through a pandemic. They lived through being on the precipice of the Third World War. They've lived through, now we have another mass shooting. They lived through another police brutality. They lived through George Floyd. They're only 21, 22 years old, and they're still here.
Yeah.
Like, they have lived through entire generations of trauma in 2 decades, and they still here. Like, they are here and performing. They're doing it under that watchful auspices of social media. They're doing it under all of these new age technologies that we can't even truly comprehend. And this generation is still here, and they're still fighting, and they're still doing those things, so I think they deserve our grace.
I like that.
And so that's the way that I look at it. I think that we have to be willing to give it if we're going to receive it.
Oh, we're wrapping up now? Oh, that was pretty good.
It's a great way to wrap up.
So let me ask this. That might be your last word if you choose it to be. I want us to just talk, if you all can end us on a note of what freedom, what peace, and what justice kind of look like, or if you can play with those three words. Because I'm thinking about this idea, again, us being 6 decades removed from the Freedom March and the I Have a Dream speech and this idea of peace and freedom. We know that in order to get those things, there's sacrifices that need to be made, and justice looks complicated. Can you talk to us about that, and perhaps rooted in love as well? I know, a bunch of questions, Bakari. I'm just giving you a lot to work with in closing for us.
I'll try to be brief because that is a bunch of questions. The thing that I'm thinking about the most is, again, the people who are in this room right now, you came out on a Thursday evening to hear black men speak on the stage, prominent black men speak on the stage. I'm a local black man, so I'm happy just to be here and listening to the conversation. So I can't go to you and just say, just go vote. That would be a waste for this. Y'all are the leaders in your community, in your family. Take that personal. Take that personally. As far as we were talking about deconstructing America and everything else, it really does begin with you and the mindset that you have. You know, when you take a flight and they say, if anything happens, make sure you put on your mask first before you help out somebody else. A lot of times we're focused on everything else instead of what happens here. So looking at what is freedom to you, what is justice to you, what is democracy to you. Because I'm not telling you to ascribe to my definition of it. I'm telling you to ascribe to yours and the people that are in your community. There is a reason that they're in your community. There is a reason why a creator put you and your family members together. And as long as you have that peace of mind, and then there's a great Luther song that I always quote. He says, I'd rather have bad times with you than good times with someone else. That is a mentality within it. I would rather have bad times with you, because we know that in our community, we have gone through bad times, and we have gone through bad times together, instead of trying to cross over or flake out or token out for something else and say we're going to have good times together. I'm asking for everyone for that freedom, for that peace, to excel our democracy together. We may have some bad times together, but we're together. And that's better than good times with someone else.
Yeah, I'll be brief. I think that we need to, I think that the three things. The first is we have to treat justice and love like verbs. They require you to act. And I think that a lot of black folk are really good with the faith and not so good with the works part. And so we got to kind of recalibrate that. We real good on Sundays. We ain't so good on Monday through Saturday. And I think that that is something that we have to recall, that faith and works, they go hand in hand. So it's an action item. You know, you can't just love somebody as a noun. You got to, that love has to act. Justice is an action. So that's first. Second thing is, I think we have to reframe the way we teach leadership, even at Morehouse. Because I think that for far too long we taught that leaders mean however many people you have following you. And that's just perverted. Leadership begets other leaders. And so you're not a leader unless you're creating other leaders in your orbit. You could be, Eddie Long or T.D. Jakes or whomever it may be, or Jamal Bryant, and have a bunch of parishioners. That's not leadership. I think even they would tell you that. But the true leadership the true leaders are those who have other leaders around them or grooming other people to lead. That's second. And the last thing is the most difficult part to what my brother right here was talking about, this journey that we're on. It's exhausting. But black folk in this country, to end on the point that you brought up, Dr. Rice, black folk in this country, we have to continue to love. But the hard part is that we have to love our neighbors even when they don't love us. And that's just a damn hard theory to accomplish.
And that's a radical king approach.
Yeah, right? That's why he's better than the rest of us, because I ain't there yet.
That's right.
Yeah, not even close.
Well, Bakari Sellers, Chris, Bruce, thank you so much for your time this evening. We appreciate you. We appreciate the sacrifices you all have made.
Thank you.
close out, and thank you again. I want to thank you, Bakari and Chris, and my colleague David Walrice for taking the time to join us, and I want to thank all of you for coming out. The conversation has been engaging, enriching, and we appreciate that. We will now close out with the UZ Brown Choraleers, who will come on the stage and close us out, and then there will be in the lobby a book signing. You can purchase Bakari's book and some refreshments. Thank you.
me.